So welcome everyone. I'd just like to start off by just giving an overview of the project and also some of the reasons why we chose to select Enterprise Architect and Prolaborate as the tools for this particular project. So we had obviously had a choice of different EA tools, and we chose Sparx and Prolaborate because we had a number of different stakeholders who had varying interests, and we're also looking at a tool that was able to adapt and grow as we matured our enterprise architecture practice and also the organizational awareness of enterprise architecture and what it could deliver in terms of transformation for the business. The Sparx tool is quite feature rich. It does require a level of training and knowledge to be able to get the most out of the tool. But the great thing about the tool is it can also be used with various different standards and notations. So we had a pre-existing team of business analysts. We're very much focused on process mapping and capture, and being essentially an organization that was building a water network from scratch in a very remote region in Saudi Arabia, we felt we needed that flexibility in a tool set. So that's why we chose Sparx and Prolaborate. Next slide, Ramsay. Sorry, Philip, you had a question? We might leave the questions to the end. That's okay. So water management, business transformation. So the pack, we're going to go through a number of different sections. So a little bit about the client overview and the project overview, some of the key stakeholder concerns, and then I'm going to hand over to Ramsay, and he's going to take you through the demo and show what we actually achieved with the tool and some of the outcomes that were delivered for the organization and some of the lessons learned. Next slide. Thanks, Ramsay. So myself and Ramsay, so we engaged two organisations. So Idrica being a specialist water management consultancy firm, and also Ramsay's company, who are the specialists in Enterprise Architect and Prolaborate. And they helped us to train a number of the internal team, as well as the thinking around how to structure some of the content and bring that into the tool, and then be able to visualize and then communicate that internally to the business. Next slide, thanks.
Sorry.
You're right. And one of the key outcomes of enterprise architecture is communication. So we see, and if you've been in enterprise architecture for some time, you can see or would have seen a number of architecture practices that haven't delivered or haven't helped deliver the outcomes for the business. And they're typically, the characteristics of those are typically ivory tower enterprise architecture practices, which are largely theory focused, not engaged with the business, not seen as being value adding, and not achieving the transformational goals that the business is seeking. So communication, engagement, socializing the enterprise architecture, being able to collaborate and also be part of adaptive change, some of the key goals of enterprise architecture. So that's why we leveraged Sparx and Prolaborate, because we wanted to achieve rapid time to value. We wanted to be able to capture that information and then present it to the business and communicate it to the business very quickly. Ramsay, next slide, please. So through the layers of the enterprise architecture, there's a number of building blocks, if you like, and we wanted to be able to capture those building blocks, show the relationships, and have that traceability from business architecture right through to the technology architecture layer. Sparx allowed us to model, capture all of those pieces of information, all those building blocks, go through with various groups and teams to review, approve, give us that visibility from a leadership decision-making and insight perspective right through to operations. We use the tool to drive our architecture governance and also to capture decisions that were being made at a project level on specific architectural decisions. Slide. Thanks, Ramsay. So having a common language model is very important in terms of being able to communicate the enterprise architecture across the business and the various stakeholder groups. We chose to run the project based on our business capability model. So we wanted to focus on the core capabilities or the prioritized capabilities that we needed to focus on, aligned to our portfolio that we were working towards in terms of uplifting the organization, and we also used the tool not just to capture the enterprise architecture artifacts across the four main layers of TOGAF, but we also went down into capturing specific water assets and those components as well, and then linking those back to data, to applications, which Ramsay will show you further on in the pack. Next slide, thanks. So there were a number of challenges that we faced being in a remote region in the middle of the desert, 2 hours from any major city, building a brand new water infrastructure, so pipes, desalination plants, pump stations, reservoirs, etc. The challenges of starting up a new water network, the asset construction, and then the water utility to then operate and maintain that were quite significant. So things like increased demand from residential, commercial, industrial, the maintenance of the network, being able to track the construction of the assets. The Saudi Water Authority was increasing their level of regulatory compliance. Water quality and scarcity obviously is a big challenge in a region such as Saudi Arabia, which then creates the challenge of maintaining a sustainable water supply and also monitoring the network in terms of operational control. So at what points should we be capturing data across the network? What do we then do with that data? How is that data disseminated across the business? The digital services and capabilities obviously are critical, were critical in terms of being able to meet, address these challenges and mitigate some of the risks that we were facing. So we needed to build a digital water network quite quickly. Data capture, we were capturing a lot of information, and then it was increasing at a very rapid rate. Interoperability was front of mind, security of the network, and also the data. Being able to document the assets as they were commissioned. So we had a lot of partners working on the asset construction. Engineering reviews were critical. Being able to then manage the assets and go through the asset lifecycle management process. So we had various systems of record across the business, and being able to automate processes that ran across multiple systems, and to achieve things like smart metering, water quality monitoring, and also field service and works management. Next slide. Thanks, Ramsay. So there's obviously a number of stakeholder concerns. As I mentioned, water quality and security were key, maintaining assets, managing the infrastructure, addressing pollution. So for example, how do we mitigate the risks of the desalination process byproducts going back into the Red Sea, making sure we weren't damaging the ecosystem. Embracing a whole range of different technologies, being able to make those technologies interoperate, the data capture and data management associated with all of those, managing a very diverse set of external stakeholders. So there was a significant focus and high demand on enterprise architecture and the associated tools that we'd selected to help the organisation progress through the necessary digital transformation and be able to support the operations of the asset construction and also the water utility operation. So we chose TOGAF. I mean, TOGAF is a de facto standard when it comes to enterprise architecture practices. We didn't spend a lot of time looking at different frameworks and different options. We didn't have the time. I mean, some practices decide to adapt their own architecture framework. We took what we could off the shelf, which works quite well. We also adopted the ArchiMate standard for notation. ArchiMate has its pros and cons like any standard, but we wanted something that we could leverage off the shelf very quickly, rather than having something that was bespoke and custom. Next slide. Thanks, Ramsay. So the tool, as I said, was chosen for specific reasons and specific criteria, which we did a market scan and assessment and selected Sparx as the appropriate tool. Ramsay and the team spent some time with us to help us structure the tool correctly, which made sense to us, and also allowed us to actually manage a lot of the components and the objects that we were creating and the content that we were creating in the tool, and then how to quickly publish that, and also the ability to support multiple teams and also drive reuse of those components, which was very successful. So I'm going to hand over to Ramsay now, and he'll take you through the slides from the demo, from the actual implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Cam. Appreciate it. I want to let you know that it was a real honor for me to work with Cam and his professionalism and how he drove me from a business point of view. And I came up with the response to the architecture, and we worked on this quite collaboratively over the last couple of years, and it's been very rewarding. There's some things we cannot disclose because of NDA. However, we do have approval to share what we've got here in the demo. Over many years, luckily I've been in EA since 2001. It's a long time. I love this market. I love this work that we do. And I've evolved a structure that I seem to think works quite well. There's the strategic view, which is where are you going? There's a project view, which is how do we get there? Project management is simply between two states of business. It's like, where are we going and where are we today? And then, so we created a project proof of concept, and we structured it, as Cam said, on the TOGAF theory, which was really helpful. And the operational view is, here's where we are now. Architecture isn't good enough if it just talks about where are we going or how do we get there, but the end result has to be stored somewhere, and we call that the operational view, which We organized by capability. When I get to the capability slide, we'll talk a bit more about how we modeled a very extensive water management capability model. So we were able to organize it by capability, not by organization, because as you know, organizations change. Capabilities remain very, very stable. They either come or go. So that was the operational view. And then we had a reuse catalog where everything went for all the consumers in the model to know where to go to find approved elements instead of creating brand new ones out of scratch that are undocumented. Documentation was very important. We had hundreds of people coming, new hires with not understanding the language. So our challenge was to hide our enterprise architecture and make it like a business experience where you have understanding of the business knowledge. And you can imagine from what Cam said, all the layers of business knowledge. Water management is just one area, and then there's many other disciplines in that area. There was a reuse templates we built so that people could have a standardized way of generating packaging templates or Word templates. And then there was the team sandbox where we put all the people who work in the repository. Again, we deployed our Sparx because of its capability to integrate 3 or 4 products. And then you can even extend out with other products. You can have you have to have the basic core Sparx tools, but then we can also connect that to many other types of environments like Jira, Confluence, DevSoc apps, SharePoint, ServiceNow, which we did use a little bit of that import. So the demo I'm going to jump into is in Prolaborate, and I am going to jump into the tool at some point in time, and I'm also able to jump into Enterprise Architect to sort of show you that side if I need to do that. So we're going to follow again the game, the framework of using where are you going, defining the business layer, defining the application layer, which includes data, and the technology layer, and then all of the other steps to do it. Right, all the way from conceptual thinking at the higher level down to the actual process controller in the stormwater building on site. So we went all the way from conceptual line of visibility from the boardroom or leadership, I should say, all the way through to the actual part, which was really exciting, and it's quite simple to do in Sparx. So the first thing was where are you going? What's the vision? Which is the most, in all my 20-some years as an enterprise architect, the reason there's so many failures, I think the failures are like 90%, success is 10. I think that may be optimistic, I'm not sure, but in my experience, is that people do not communicate with everyone. Where are we going? There was a boardroom meeting, a bunch of people talked about it, there was 10 PowerPoints, and go build it. And I don't care how many billions it takes, go build it. We don't really care about governance or, that type of thing. Just go build it. That's kind of where we are, and we are getting better. The industry has improved massively, but we're still got a long way to go. So what did they really have in their head when they thought they were going to do a new project, new architecture? So we have a simple formula based on a lightweight TOGAF, lightweight ArchiMate. You don't have to overdo it all. And we come up with a scoping tool, which is determine the in-scope capability for this specific project, because the repository can hold hundreds of projects, which would be better than one project at a time, of course. And also governance was really important. Most organizations see government as a difficult situation. In Sparx, Enterprise Architect, and Prolaborate, it is simple. If anyone is familiar with the tool, you know how traceable and how simple it is to create traceabilities between here's the law, here's the interpretation or regulations, here's the policy that we use to do it. So I've worked with some architects who were actually promoted because the auditor came in and saw that the entire architecture was simply audited. Also, there's architecture governance, which means nobody can mess around in the model. We appointed a model guardian. All the toolkits and diagrams are predetermined. We can't go off on our own building any type of visual or any type of element. We stamp them out like a cookie cutter. So setting the tone for the architecture vision and where do you really want to go is a key to our success. If I can see and understand what's in that boardroom or in that leadership, and I can take that all the way through to the architects at all the layers, and there's many layers as we know, then we succeed. So we leverage them, of course, TOGAF is a overarching framework. However, you can look through stuff and you can find some organizations have matured business architecture. So for many years, we've selected business architecture, which ties in beautifully to ArchiMate, ties in really nice to TOGAF, and there's a nice sweet spot there. So we followed that. Having said that, the first thing we did was we have a whole bunch of architecture principles that are in the model that people can read immediately, that are there available on their desktop. And whenever there's a confusion about direction in business, application, data, or technology, we use these few principles. There's only good if there's a few of them. And we use them to guide us, like business continuity or business integrity or business knowledge or single source of truth. Those are overarching architectural ideas. For those of you who haven't seen our capabilities, they're so powerful that you can actually use them to trace the entire model. And if you take a capability approach, not an organizational approach, which tends to change over time, capabilities are nice conceptual placeholders. They're nouns, and that noun is structural, and people can really get a sense of that sense of permanence, because solution delivery tends to be service-oriented or behavioral-oriented with processes and data structures and applications, and we go deeper and deeper into the layers that we need to go to. So we cataloged the business capabilities and we modeled them all. And I think at this stage I might risk, going into the demo. Hang on, let me stop this screen, stop sharing, and then start sharing in the demo. If I can find it. There we go. Okay, good. So now I've logged into Prolaborate. And what we did is our challenge was to make it as business and user-friendly as possible, simplify it as a communication device. Because everybody, where I am, there's a tool called SharePoint. And the big joke in North America is they call it Lost Point, because everybody says, just go to SharePoint and everybody gets lost. So we've designed this in a way so that you don't get lost. And we use the Prolaborate dashboards. Very happy to say I've been partnered and involved with Nizam Mohammed, who has been the visionary who came up with Prolaborate and made architecture collaborative, visual, and communicative in a very powerful way using Prolaborate. And of course, we just followed the different layers of the TOGAF. So, not everybody's going to come in the model and look at everything. They're going to look at their interested area, the data architecture. So let's look at the business architecture, which is the default that we've got. And in that splash page, this is just a splash page. There's more detail below it. We just told them what business architecture was. We looked at the value chain, value streams and levels. We then also, because business architecture breaks into two parts, structural and behavioral, and we have to address on the right was the right brain, and on the left was the left brain, which is the noun based. So the structural is the capability based. Let's see if I got more down here. There's a bar there. Excuse me. So this view was as terse as we could make it as an entry point for the consumer, and it included the noun based, the capability model in detail, and then something that I got from an expert out there who wrote a book called Business Knowledge. patterns, I believe, or something like that. I should remember, Ronald Ross. And I've got a thing called I like his concept of the concept model. It looks a lot like a conceptual data model. It looks a lot like a meta model. It's actually better than that. It's a semantic model. It's a language semantic model. It has no technical capability to it. And we'll cover that in a minute. But let me go into, I can click in any of my diagrams here, and I can go over to the capability model. And of course, we can heat map them. So let's take water network management. So we spend a lot of time modeling and fully documented the water management capability model, plus a couple others, enterprise network, which includes HR, marketing, and of course, most of us use these reusable models that are available, or we can build them. And so in this case, this heat map is good, so it turns green. And if it's white, it means not evaluated. For example, we go to this one, and you'll notice they're all documented. Everybody knows what these are, and we've got not evaluated. And of course, we've got things like the road mapping. So we want to be able to roadmap these in planning models for architecture planning. So we've got a roadmap date, and then we've got other approval dates in the capability model. So I'll go back. And we'll go into the capability model. We went there. And then, of course, I personally have liked to organize everything by capability in the noun world. And so that means I organize my requirements. We organize our requirements by capability, like financial capability has financial requirements. Medical capability has medical requirements. And you can basically decompose that to different levels, because as you know, if you've been an architect, which we have been for years, people all talk their own shop talk. You go from one organization to another and you can't understand what they're saying. So architects really like models. We like capability models, and we can learn so much about your business by you giving us a semantic model with no data stuff. Just what is the language you speak? For example, if you go into the ICU, and there's an emergency, life and death situation, they don't make up words. The doctors and nurses have very clear words that mean something, because you cannot miscommunicate. And that's why we like the idea of a semantic or a concept model. Let me show you. You've seen this. You most likely understand it. You've most likely done something like this, but this is germane to understanding business knowledge, reusing business knowledge, and for new hires coming in, or anyone like, as a programmer, what do I know about your business? As a data architect, what do I know about your business? Nothing. And that's the problem that we have, is nobody really knows where we're going. And everybody thinks we know where we're going on all these different layers, from programmer to tester to BA. You get the story. And so this gives us a way to go in and define the language, and not only the language, but the grammar that we use, like electrical system. And you could go into any organization, like we've done for years now, and understanding this simple model that's basically a grammatical noun-verb model that discusses business without technology, because technology gets in the way. We can understand exactly what the common language model was very important to this client, and it became very important. And of course, a glossary was generated out of this as well. On the noun side, on the verb side, we use the ArchiMate process cooperation diagram, which is really awesome, because most people just deal with a swim lane, and then nobody knows where the swim lane fits in. So we took a really architectured point of view. We used process architecture to basically show these are modified ArchiMate, because we modified ArchiMate a little bit. The standards they have, we're running into the standards of business process management, BPMN. So we just kept the ArchiMate symbol, but we put it within a chevron, which is more understood by business process management practice. It can be switched back and forth. It's not hardwired. So you have what's the business event, what process, and then what is what is the process cooperation? Which process have to go upstream, which are downstream? And this is really critical in our experience on how to do it. Another thing we run into as architects is that people jump right away, either into coding the solution or into the swim lane diagram, where you're lost here. I mean, if we start with the swim lane diagram as architects, we have just increased our project by 5 times. So the better thing to do is if you take an architecture point of view and drill down, and then it's simple to create a flow chart or a swim lane diagram for each one of them. We use the core notation also, not 160 elements. I think we used 120 elements. So we're avoiding, for some reason, standards people love to overdo everything. The latest TOGAF 10 is 3,000 slides, 3,000 pages. Why don't we boil it down, make it simpler? So business architecture was one of them. The dashboards are, the next one I'm going to cover is the application architecture. And I might have to resort to my slide, but I think I'll just keep going in the demo. Cam, if you see something I'm missing, just jump in, but I'm not running the slides.
Yeah, like I think this is great. I think what you've shown here is how we approached BPM, which was a key focus for the business. So even though we started and drove the project from a business capability perspective, the different types of process models that you've shown in terms of how we actually went through business process management and then the establishment of the Business Process Center of Excellence, having a process classification framework based on APQC, which we tailored specifically for the business, and then how we actually then reviewed the processes, approved the processes through regular cadence sessions, and again, and going back to that engagement piece with the business, making sure that we had process owners or process stewards nominated. And also the other point around reuse. So your advice in terms of how to correctly structure and configure the tool up front meant that we actually were able to have quite a high level of reuse with respect to modeling, capturing and structuring our organizational knowledge.
Yeah, thanks, Cam, for jumping in on those key points. We need to help organizations become more mature in process. And with Cam's background, that was easy. With my background, we do have to have process owners. We can also, at some point in time, I'll just break out and show, Prolaborate allows us to make discussions upon even one element, for example, in the model, and then have reviews and have it all formalized. It's a cultural experience. And as anyone knows, when you go in to do change in an organization, culture and communication are number one. Everything else is really secondary. And if we set that from day one, the job of the architect and all of the players gets much simpler because we're dealing with complex sets of players. So application architecture is a lot of fun.
Sorry, Ramsay, just one question.
Yes, sir.
So Damien's actually posed a point in the chat regarding why didn't we start with BPM. I think one of the things that we struggled with this particular project is we already had, there was the term I would use is cat herding. So there was a lot of different projects, a lot of different people trying to do elements of architecture, but not really having the architectural experience. And so this project really had to do quite a bit of cat herding. And Damien's question was, if you were starting with BPM, why didn't you do the value streams first?
We did. We actually did.
Yeah.
We did value stream, then process cooperation, then BPMN. Yeah.
That's right. So it was a structured approach using the typical process classification framework, and that the typical pyramid where you start from a value stream perspective. But we weren't actually starting with BPM. BPM, the concept of BPM already existed, and unfortunately, they were doing it. The organisation was doing it in a very uncontrolled, ungoverned way. And what we delivered through this project was a lot more a structure, a lot more awareness of how to do BPM properly, rather than just kind of doing it in a very unstructured way.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, we left you with that impression. I maybe went too quick over it. We were quite careful to have level 1, level 2, level
Mm.
3. I don't have an example here of process scope or SIBOC, but maybe I'll see that in the part of the model.
And I
Yeah,
think another key point is um, some of the stakeholders, when you talk about a value chain or a value stream, some people don't understand what that is.
exactly. It's
And so,
it's
yeah,
yeah, it's
yeah, you
whatever
go.
communicates as an architect. If I throw the spaghetti on the wall and it doesn't stick, I'm going to try another diagram. So one thing that does work really well, value is depending on your client, is the process scope tends to work pretty good. This is an ArchiMate diagram. That was a good contribution. But we've coupled the whole thing with business process management, not just BPMN. That is much deeper than a BPMN diagram. Business process management includes value stream and value chain. That's part of the whole discipline. Thanks. Good question.
And I think the other thing too, which I think you'll probably cover in the application architecture, is how to then go down through the layers. So um, business architecture is largely more conceptual, and then with the complexity of the application technology landscape, because there had been essentially a large bucket of money. Everyone was essentially, when they had a business case, the business case response was yes, go out and buy that. So there was really no consideration of buying all these different applications, all these different technology sets, and then having to run processes that touched multiple applications or multiple technologies. And the project actually brought an awareness together of potentially some bad decisions that had been made in terms of, well, we've got this a very extremely heterogeneous landscape of applications. How do we then run a business process or multiple business processes that need to be joined together? So things like the process scope, the business process context diagrams help to understand how we actually then connect the business architecture layer to the application architecture layer. And it also highlighted some of the problems or less optimal decisions that had been made previously.
And Cam brings up a good point. So we were careful in the structure of Sparx because one thing about Prolaborate is that if you don't have a good enterprise architecture repository structure, your work with Spark with Prolaborate is really difficult. So we curated the EA model so it was automatically simple to add to Prolaborate. For example, and I'll show you that we can go into the EA layer to look at traceability, but to reemphasize what Cam just said is we used quite extensively diagrams that help trace from top to bottom. So we took the business architecture capability or organization charts or business unit, and we basically said it's accountable for the wastewater treatment capability, and capabilities are executed by process. That was one of our views. And then this process was enabled by support staff, laboratory staff. And in this case, where ArchiMate has a problem, in that ArchiMate and BPMN, BPMN calls it a pool or an application service or activity task. And ArchiMate calls this an application service. So we modified little bits of ArchiMate here and there to keep people happy and harmonize the business process discipline, which is extremely rigorous for the last 35 years, and the newly formed ArchiMate stuff. So it would be nice if they would use some of the symbols across. So in that case, we went all the way from a business unit, like where am I in the organization? We built lots of org charts. Here's our capability that we're looking at, higher, lower, higher level or lower. And then we had this thing called secondary treatment process, which you could drill into, and we could then do below it, we could do swim lanes as time permitted. But then you have a smart, an application service here in ArchiMate, but here it's a BPMN symbol, and it's being executed, requires a SBB component to be determined. We didn't know yet. So as architects, we were really good there. We also had a neat thing. We also had a neat thing in that we cataloged all of our applications, and I'll kind of go back there so that
through the integration with the CMDB,
right, and with ServiceNow exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So
one thing I probably wanted to mention is the point around coherency. So what Ramsay's describing here is that there was a lot of work done up front to capture current state, and the current state baseline actually was quite, I'll use the word confronting, but it was actually quite confronting across the organisation to just highlight the level of complexity that had been created by all of these disparate projects that had been spun up. And, you know, as architects, you hear the word coherency used a lot, but very few architects can actually explain what that means.
Exactly.
And with the tool and the work that was done, we were actually able to drive coherency. And what I mean by coherency is that the awareness across the business of everyone's data, applications, technology that they were using, also how it interrelates or interoperates, but with other teams. And so that coherency across the business and the awareness of, well, actually, I need some of your data to actually help my team operate more efficiently. And then what does that look like both upstream and downstream? How do we then look at rationalizing applications or bringing functionality together into a platform? The opportunities to reduce costs, rationalize applications became quite obvious. Just wanted to mention that.
Okay, so thanks. And then we also, I built the MDG that runs this whole thing, and I'm a 20-some year practitioner in many standards, so I noticed they don't harmonize. And talking about coherency, is the meta model wouldn't be coherent. If you go strictly with ArchiMate, you're missing things in BPM. If you're missing things in other areas like requirements management, many other different areas, and they're easy. It actually was not hard to harmonize the standards, for example. So another thing we had is application lifecycle management, or APM. We had the business criticality of the actual component, business or infrastructure. We had the operating expenditure, so we could generate all kinds of financial reporting immediately. This was anticipated years ago. And the benefit that we didn't know about at the time, by being so explicit with details about every application, is that now with the birth of AI, we have literally MDG language model, and a model that we can turn EA Genie, the new product that's coming out shortly, if it isn't already out, and a bunch of other AI tools that can not only read the Sparx repository you've built with all this good information for new people, and for practitioners and reuse, and very well documented and able to be reviewed. But the AI can be extended to give me all your spreadsheets and look at all of your. So I don't want to go too much into that, but the opportunities for AI were kind of magical because if you don't have the data recorded somewhere, the AI is not going to tell you the total cost of ownership, for example. Another thing we can do, which is nice, which I won't go into because people have demoed it so many times, is the idea to add comments and do reviews about any element in the model or a diagram. And so having said that, that's pretty well it for that the application area. I think that's about it for application area. We took a very business-centric view to the architecture so that everyone, including a programmer, developer, data architect, solution architect, could come in and we can see everything documented properly. Okay, so dashboard. Let's go to the next dashboard. And we're going to be running out of time, so we need to kind of move a little bit so there's more question and answer shortly. Data architecture. We have of course their data architecture principles. Data information flow was very important, and conceptual data catalog. And also we were pretty serious about security requirements. And as you all know, if you've used Enterprise Architect, you can trace anything to anything. So I can drag and drop these requirements into any element and they're immediately traced. I'm going to go into Enterprise Architect too, I think, if there's a few minutes remaining here. Again, the principles were there, not so much in that area. And I wonder if I've got, no, I guess that's about it for here. Yeah, that's right, it is. Okay, so I'm going to jump in to the stop sharing and start sharing with Sparx Enterprise Architect, which is here. Okay. Now maybe I'll keep this coherent. Some people like this on the left. I like it on the right. Okay, so again, the model you just looked at inside of Prolaborate is this model. Now, I've got a bunch of diagrams open, but under the proof of concept was a project. So we can have hundreds of projects here and do reporting on projects about which one's in trouble based on, again, tag values or attribution that tells you, is it over budget, over time, how much does it cost, how many people are involved, how complex it is. We use Sparx to do everything we can think of. Under implementation, well, just to do a segue here under technology architecture, we have the deployment model, which I think is something we just looked at in Prolaborate. So this is the tool for architects. Now you can, we selectively recommend turning on updates in Prolaborate for people who know how to fill in the attribution, which is ideal because the more you get people involved in the documentation, give all little pieces of all the work to everyone, and everybody becomes involved, which becomes a socialization of architecture, which is the only way to make this succeed because it's so complex. So here's a diagram showing another one of the technology architecture areas that there's so much work in here. And then, of course, I want to cover with you in the last few minutes here is when we went to implementation strategy, we were pretty happy how we went down this deep. So we only picked a through line from top to bottom because I saw a question come up about how do we deal with traceability from top to bottom. And basically within the diagrams and within Prolaborate, we did all of that. Right now, we're not looking at the traceability layer. We're just looking at the structured layers. Okay, where is it? Stormwater assets. I guess it's coming up. It's just a little slow. That wasn't that interesting. My screen stopped presenting, did it? Or I wasn't presenting. It stopped presenting?
Yeah, we just lost it.
I wonder if this is it. Yeah, we got it back. I don't know, something died. So then we got water management. We have a glossary that we can use in Sparx, but we can also curate that, with status updates, and you can see it was fairly well documented in places. So we had a glossary area. I wanted to share with you this diagram here, which was brilliant. We went all the way from abstract elements down to each part, because like one thing I don't think we stressed was this is like a digital twin of what's out there, if you will, in the actual world, as far as being able to reflect knowledge right from the lowest level, which is an instantiation of a program logic controller.
Mm.
There's some notes on it. And also, I think if we went to double click on it, you go to the tag values, you can see that we have all of the information about that program controller. So we didn't do asset management, but we kept it conceptual. But I've had a few clients that have actually gone deeper to instantiating things and making them even objects. So for example, this group I know building submarines uses Sparx to build submarines, and they can trace parts. So one part is traced to another part when it's being replaced. People do interesting things with Sparx Enterprise Architect. Okay, I'm going to go back to the slides, which I think I have to do every time. I have to click it in and go, unless I learn a new trick here. Some tools like GoToMeeting, you can turn your whole screen open, which I really like. Is it coming up? No, it isn't. Okay, I don't know why it isn't showing the slide deck. Where's the slide deck?
While you're bringing that up,
there we go. Yeah. Sorry. Now, I don't think it's showing full screen either, so I don't like the way this team stuff works. Sorry about this. I've got a better way of doing it somewhere. If I do window, I think this was it.
We can see it
right there,
Ramsay.
There it is. There it is. Yeah. So we took you through capability, and I've got the slides as a handout for you folks as a backup to what we've covered during the session. How we went from value chain to process cooperation. Yeah, here's an example of SIPOC, which is germane to business process management. As we all know in North America, General Electric became one of the most powerful corporations because they obsessed over process. And guess who took it seriously was Jeff Bezos. So Jeff Bezos, Amazon, FedEx, all the major corporations used the concept of value chain, process cooperation, SIPOC, and then down to BPMN. So we won that battle some time ago, just to reinforce that. As far as traceability goes, we could trace anything to everything in Sparx and Prolaborate, which was always important. But traceability isn't that important for most people in silos because they just care about their own stuff. But for the architects, for us, it is. So we can also do lots of reporting in business architecture, and now, how we're using AI tools, standby. That's really working well in our examples, and I'm sure there'll be some major releases by the team at Prolaborate. And of course, requirements management. We use the use case or storyboard model. And we cataloged our requirements so we can drag and drop them into any element and trace them immediately. Of course, here's an example of how we traced from a digital claim service in ArchiMate or in BPMN all the way through all the requirements that it needed to meet so we could generate the solution architecture contract and documents so people could build it. The application layer we ran through, business footprint again. We didn't get to the point yet where we were generating, because we weren't in production long enough, about plan, go live, active, sunset, end of life for application portfolio management, but that's easily done with the right thought process. And of course, we could generate out matrices, which showed you which applications and which capabilities are we going to invest and divest for leadership decision making, which is my focus, is to allow leaders to really basically leverage architecture for competitive advantage and for really leveraging how we survive. Application portfolio management was allowed because of all the rich set of tag values, they call them in enterprise architect, their attributes. Data architecture, covered that. I'm just kind of reviewing. This is a Microsoft Azure document that we use, like when you're creating a cloud app. A data dictionary was in there. And I'm going to try to close a little early so we can have more questions. And then, of course, we ended up with the wastewater pumping. So we kind of want to show you all the way from where are you going to how do we get there. And this is now in the operational view. So when people come in, I don't know if anybody saw the EA Summit session on the UK Defence Force on how every soldier could read the Prolaborate model. Well, we took that inspiration to heart and said, wouldn't it be nice if anyone in the organization at any layer of expertise, any knowledge, could read and understand the as-built engineering behind the work. And the engineering, we could also do engineering, like Cam brought up, engineering reviews. That was the plan to, look at these things and review them when using Prolaborate, approve them as part of the approval process, and then have everything documented live, real, and not in Word, but in a website through Prolaborate that's available. And so I'm going to leave it here, Cam, and for everyone, maybe Cam, we want to wrap up, but a couple points I wanted to make is the common language model and using a framework and empowering your team was number one, but maybe I stole some thunder. But Cam, do you want to jump in on any more? And if anybody's got questions?
Yeah, I think one of the things that tool did do is it really drove the architectural governance. It made governance a lot easier. You showed before the ability to comment on specific architectural artifacts or diagrams, being able to then collaborate on those, look at the relationships from so the business layer down into the physical asset layer. So it actually lifted the awareness of the entire organization. I think it would have been, I couldn't think of another tool that could have done what we achieved using Sparx and Prolaborate, and the ability to do a lot of the feature rich management of all the content in the Sparx, and then being able to then present that very quickly to senior execs through Prolaborate, and them actually seeing that in real time what the organization looked like. It was actually quite a compelling value proposition. So yeah, it really sold itself, and the investment was not significant compared to some of the other projects that were being run.
Yeah, the when you look at other tools, which I've been involved with for over many years, one organization that was actually on EA Summit in the US, the Center of Medicare and Medicare Services, saved $1 million a year over other tools using Sparx Prolaborate. And now they're applying business intelligence, which I really want to re-emphasize to any of you, all you architects out there, get into it as quick as you can. This is a powerful thing beyond marketing. No more damn coding, no more damn SQL. I love SQL, I write it, I've taught it. And anybody who does database modeling knows you can write and build anything. However, if I'm a programmer or a database guy, the business guy doesn't know that. And then he'd have to go talk to the programmer or the SQL guy. And, I just saw a demo that blew me away where a business guy wrote down a question that was impossible to ask unless you're a really good SQL writer. And it did 4 inner and outer joins automatically from structured, simple English language, or any language, I suppose, if you want other than English. So that's where I think we're going to come into our own between the power of Prolaborate and EA to do collaboration online for stakeholders and the ability to ask any dumb question immediately from a well-structured repository is nothing short of game changing. And I was going to go retire, but I came back 100% because this is going to be so much fun. Anyway, closing. Thanks so much for everybody attending, and reach out to Cameron, who's in the Australia time zone, and I'm on the Seattle or the West Coast time zone of the United States, Canada.
I think we've got a couple of questions too, Ramsay.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm over. Done. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Cameron.
Yeah, great. Well done. Thanks, mate. So there's a question from David Jenkinson. How did you manage to help stakeholders visualize the cascading effect of a required deliverable across all affected levels to show the amount of effort/risks of changes required to get stakeholder approval and buy-in? I think you did touch on that, Ramsay, the ability to present content to stakeholders, look at things like effort and risk, and then gaining stakeholder approval.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, that was anticipated at the beginning. That's a great question. And that's where I'm going to try to see if I can find that. Here it is. I don't know if you can see my screen. Yeah. I wonder if I've got a good way to show it. In the production version of this, I don't think I have. But so good question. So we have an element in the toolkit called, let me go down here. Governance risk compliance diagram. We have an element in that toolbox. And that toolbox is called risk. So we could actually drag this in to any element. And I don't know if you know that trick. It's a trick I discovered by accident. If you actually have any element in your model, like let's say stakeholder. This is a trick that I'd found by accident. I can drag this risk. If I drag it on top and let go, I don't know if you know this, you can then do traceability on that. And do you notice how Sparx keeps moving things all over the place? Just when you get good at something. Where's the traceability screen? They keep moving it on me. Yeah, I don't know. I used to be so fast at this. There it is. So here you can see that if I touch the stakeholder, oh, it doesn't work in that. It doesn't work with a stakeholder. Interesting. So what other element could I use? I wonder if I've got any other element. Anyway, so the point I'm trying to make is that we could do, let's do a component and see if this works. Well, last chance. We're already going over time.
There's a couple more questions too, which we can cover, I think, if we got time.
If I drag risk into another element, like here, you can see that the realization comes. That means that if you have a risk and you want to trace it across your entire model or anything, what we do is we show them how to embed a risk in a project package in any element. And then you've got over here the traceability on the right between that. It looks like stakeholders don't allow you to do, you can't do a trace, but so that you could do an entire traceability tree across the entire model.
Or models.
Or models.
Yep.
Or just across actually the whole repository for that matter, yeah. exactly.
Yep. And we did, and just to cover that the thing about the stakeholder approval, we actually did run or set up regular cadence review meetings as part of our architecture governance to make sure that we were processing the review and approval and endorsement by the required stakeholders. So that was part of the governance process. I'm just going to move on to the next question. So there's one from Cliff. He's asked, does this approach allow for operational management and changes over time?
Exactly. That's why
Yeah.
we have a thing called the operational view. Is the operational view is the as is. And most architects just don't focus on having a knowledge repository after the fact so that we can grant access to business people to either update their specific capability area and do change management through that so that when we go back through another cycle, even if it's minor change, so the whole theory is based on time, on 3 dimensions plus time. So if your repository doesn't manage time and change, it's not really currently evolved enough. Good question. Thanks.
And then there was one more question. Let me just this from William Gerbers. How long did the process take, and what sort of effort was required from initial setup of the software to a usable dashboard that could be used within the business, and B, a sufficient complete model that decisions could start to be made? Do you want to take that one, Ramsay?
So we took the philosophy of iterative, or people like agile, but it's got a bad name. But the idea, iteration's been around for 50 years, is why don't we just start proof of concept as early as we did? So after training, and because we have fully configured standards ready to roll, with minor, tailoring, we were able, we were aiming for in under 6 weeks for the first business proof of concept in one specific small area to give people a sense of, plus the training, the harvesting all the data is the hard part. But instead of boiling the ocean, we just took the most critical part of the model and began there. But we have a complete structured approach to follow. So once one group saw it working, then the other people said, "Hey, it works." That was successful.
Mm. Yeah, and I think the total time was I mean, getting the product installed was very, very quick. I mean, all that was achieved in less than a week. Then we had training. The training was another. How long did we train?
It was about another week. Yeah, another
Yep,
3-4 days. And
yep.
then of course the biggest problem was lining up. Luckily we had SMEs we trained in the business. They basically knew exactly what they were doing, and they basically built all this demo that you see. And my job was to be there in his guidance and mentorship and doing all the dirty, ugly work that you don't want to get business people into, like importing spreadsheets and harvesting, which is another opportunity for AI. Can you imagine using AI to harvest data into your repository? That's another huge opportunity.
And we had a lot of, I mean, there were process models, there was the capability model, we had
Right.
data models, there was a lot of content. We had all of the asset hierarchies for things like pump stations. So, I think one of the successes was that we had that clear structure up front. We did a very, kind of lightweight overview of TOGAF, so people understood how to where to create objects, the concept of the reuse catalog. Everyone had sort of their workspace within the tool. If we were duplicates, if they were being created, that clash detection was inherent. Yeah, it was time to value was actually very fast. I think we were generating the visuals in Prolaborate literally within the first month, and then we basically just started to grow and build out the layers. So I think within sort of 4 months, we had quite a rich Prolaborate portal for the business, and we continue to to develop that. I think one of the other things that was interesting is there'd been, I think, 3 different glossary tools purchased, and the glossary tools were disconnected from any other architectural artifacts. And then the realization that we could actually just bring the glossary into Sparx and then link it to all the content in Sparx meant that we could decommission those three different glossaries. So that was an interesting win, that one. I'm just going to keep going through the questions here. So I've got one here from Patrick Roos. Can you launch a gap analysis between as-is and to-be models?
Absolutely, yeah. Sparx has a very powerful feature that most people don't use. You can actually do a baseline and make a change to the baseline, and then in Enterprise Architect, not within Prolaborate, and you can ask it to show exactly, and that's how we manage changes using baseline. To generate out the gap analysis so that we can just focus on the gaps. And talking about change and gaps brings me back to the question that David asked, I don't think I answered that in detail enough. Within Sparx and Prolaborate, it's quite simple to create, within a package structure, a review process for all levels of stakeholders and expose that into Prolaborate. So that's just a question of organization of your repository. And they can be rapidly built, because if you got reuse information and you got the right elements, it really isn't that difficult. I mean, you could go for 20, 30 layers of approvals in different layers and different timeframes as you cascade up or down, or you could do it randomly. So I would deal with it structurally in Enterprise Architect as a diagram view for Prolaborate readers.
Mm-hmm. And then there's another question from David Jenkinson. I was trying to understand. Sorry, hold on. I was trying to understand how you identified which stakeholders would need to be contacted to get their approval of a new deliverable change which will affect them. So basically, how to identify in the tool which changes or which models were relevant for a specific stakeholder, and then what actions that stakeholder needed to take.
That's where it takes some time. So unless you have a really mature organization that has a governance structure, as an architect, we could actually, instead of having architects do all the work, have all the business people trained to go in and build either by whatever level of conception. And maybe the simplest to begin is with the capability layer is try to make I would suggest using a capability to stakeholder map. So that if as long as everybody, and that in our model, we were our model guardianship was no, capabilities are prime. And so as long as everybody thinks capabilities is important in the model, then when a capability has been affected, because we have that in traceability, that the stakeholders can be affected. We could even tie that into, you can write some scripts around that also.
You can also tag those attributes, right? The attributes associated with the model.
Actually, it's much more complicated than that. So the simplest way would be to have a diagram where you create a relationship between the objects, the two elements that need to be known, because then you're hard coding something in the model to a tag value inside of the. You can do that, yes. But it might be more dynamic if you keep it linked with the relationship instead of hard code a value inside an element.
Yep. I think there's no more questions.
Great, thank you, everyone. And apparently the recording will be available tomorrow. Good luck with your ventures, and I hope it's helped you a little bit. Thank you so much.
Thank you.